Thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Wallace, your town planner. I've been a professional planner now for 35 years, and the bulk of my experience has been helping towns of around 10,000 and under. I was with Westminster for 12 years. I did a little bit of work for Rutland and Berlin and throughout the region. And I've been with Sterling for a couple of years now. And couldn't help but notice that your zoning bylaw is a bit out of date and needs a bit of updating. And so that's something that the planning board and I have begun working on. And some of the zoning amendments that we're proposing, we're going to go over tonight. There'll be more next year and the year after that, but I'll try to break it down as best I can for you. Topics we're going to cover tonight: economic development and your tax bills, the cost of community services, the planning board's zoning update effort, and then we'll go through the zoning proposals that we're looking to bring to the May town meeting. So, benefits of economic development: creates jobs, and if you do it right, they are living wage jobs. That's always the goal. Economic development also stabilizes local tax rates. I've reviewed statistics with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, and the evidence is clear that for towns with a sizable amount of economic development, they typically have lower single-family tax bills, and the year-to-year rise in those tax bills is smaller than those communities that don't have a lot of economic development. Also promotes housing stability. If you've got a good job, you can, afford a home most of the time. Prices are getting up there, but if you've got a good job, you usually got a stable housing situation. You've got a stable housing situation. You've got hopefully a stable family situation. You've got a good job and you've lived at your house for a while and you've raised a family there. Odds are at some point you're going to want to contribute to the community you live in, whether that be a Little League coach or volunteering for the fair committee or volunteering for one of the town's various boards. We're always looking for volunteers. So the next thing I want to cover is cost of community services. Now there's a thing out there called cost of community service studies, and that's an attempt to estimate how much it costs a municipality to provide services for various land uses versus how much those land uses bring in tax revenue. Who prepares these studies? It's institutes of higher learning, civic organizations, and municipal research bureaus. One such study was done for Sterling specifically back in 2009 by the American Farmland Trust. They've done these cost of community service studies for over 100 communities across the nation, with at least 50 in New England. And the study for Sterling showed that for every tax dollar generated by residential development, it costs the town $1.09 to service. So that's a net negative of 9 cents. In terms of housing, there's only one type of housing that's going to generate more in taxes than it costs in services, and that is, any guesses?
Multifamily.
Senior housing. And why is that? No kids in the school. That's the big one. For every tax dollar generated by commercial and industrial development in Sterling, it only costs the town 26 cents to service. So that's a net plus of 74 cents. For every tax dollar generated by farmland and open space, it only costs the town 34 cents to service. Now, this study might have been done back in 2009, but if we repeated this exercise today, it would only change things a few cents here and a few cents there. I've looked at the results of over 275 cost of community services studies across the nation, and in all but one, economic development brings in more in tax revenue than it costs in municipal services. So that's a community planning truism. Okay, so Sterling does have some disadvantages for economic development. We don't have municipal sewer. 38% of our land is permanently protected and will never be developed. Approximately 25% of our land is regulated by the State Watershed Protection Act. And what you have for commercially zoned land is slowly being eaten up by residential development. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And you've got a lengthy and disjointed permitting system. So, the planning board and I have decided to begin a 3-year odyssey to update your zoning bylaw. Right now, it's out of date, poorly written, confusing, and very contradictory in places. Now, we're going to try to do it in-house, and by doing so, we're going to save the town somewhere in the order of $150,000 that you would pay a consultant to do it. But in order to do it in-house, we need to break it into manageable pieces. So this is the first year, and our focus is on the economic development aspects of zoning. And that's mainly what you're going to be hearing about tonight in terms of zoning amendments. Next calendar year, we're going to begin on residential development, all the aspects of your zoning dealing with residential development. And we're going to take a good close look at your multifamily housing bylaw. Year 3, we'll tackle whatever's left over, signs, parking, what have you. So, specific problems with your zoning bylaw. So we're on to the first zoning amendment, and that's the performance zone. Can you go one ahead, please? One more time. All right, so this is your performance zone right here. The bylaw governing it has been in effect for over 30 years now, and it's 13 pages long. It's confusing, it's poorly written. If you can make heads or tails out of it, please come see me and explain it to me, because I can't figure out what it's all about. And consequently, that bylaw has not received much use over the years it's been in place. So this is a map of the performance zone. It's down in the south of town, right along Route 140, right by the greenhouses. Greenhouses right around there. You've got the town cemetery right there, nursing home right there, and just over the border in West Boylston is the interchange to I-190. Can you go back 2 slides, please? So, the planning board's proposal is to delete the performance zone section in your zoning, all 13 pages of it, rename it the Gateway Enterprise District, add what uses that we allow in that district in the zoning bylaws use regulation table, just like every other zoning district, and then add the district's dimensional requirements to the table of dimensional controls, just like every other zoning district. So, What would we be proposing to allow there? Well, we had a couple economic development forums back in March where we asked people that very question. And the answers we got was they want new commercial development, but they want it in keeping with the town's rural character. So examples of new uses that we would be allowing in this district include restaurants with or without outdoor patio seating, antique shops, breweries with restaurants or retail component, studios for arts and handcrafts, artisanal manufacturing, printing, binding, and publishing. We're also going to bring some of the uses that are allowed in your commercial district over into this district as permitted uses. But there's also some uses, that commercial uses, that you told us you don't want to see in this district, such as restaurants with drive-through, motor vehicle service stations, motor vehicle repair shops, new or used car sales, whether indoor or outdoor, drive-in or freestanding ATMs, bus or railroad stations, rail or motor freight terminals, open lot of storage of building materials, contractor equipment, and similar materials. So it was made very clear at the March forums that you don't want to see this turned into a Route 9 in Shrewsbury. So we tried to put together a list of permitted uses that would be in keeping with the town's rural character. So let's go on to the next slide, please. A little bit more about the performance zone. 22 acres of land, frontage on Route 140, Leg Road and Dana Hill Road. We've got municipal water out there, but not municipal sewer. It's 83 acres in size all told, and you've got 25 acres available for new development. Next slide, and the next. So, we're keeping the district boundaries as is, with 3 exceptions. We're taking out this parcel and that parcel right here. Those 2 parcels are owned by the State Department of Conservation and Recreation. They're permanently protected and they're never going to get built on. We're also taking out the town cemetery right here. So apparently when the planning board tried to rezone this area 3 years ago, there was a hang-up that that cemetery might get developed for economic purposes. And it wasn't the case then, it's not the case now. Cemeteries are permanently protected, especially town-owned cemeteries. So rather than have that be a hang-up this time around, we just took it out. We'll rezone it rural residential. So that's the proposal for the performance zone, changing it to the Gateway Enterprise District. I'm going to tell you how it's going to work for each of these amendments. We're here tonight to get your feedback. These aren't proposals that are set in stone. I've been making the round to all of the town's various boards, commissions, and committees and explaining to them what we're doing and why we want to do it. That's my reason to be here before you tonight. So I'm here to get your feedback on these proposals. I'm going to be writing it down over here. I'm going to be sharing it with the planning board. We're going to spend our December and January meetings reviewing all the feedback we got from the various boards and committees and tonight. We'll modify our proposals as we see fit, and then we will come back before you in this very room in February and show you the final proposals. Okay, so these are draft proposals, let's keep that in mind. With that said, I will open it up to any questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
On the town side of 140.
Can you stand up so I
Sure.
can?
On the town side of 140 in this photo,
Yeah.
there's some houses that are also included in the drawing. If these change, does that tax base, how those houses are taxed, will that get changed? And then my second question is, on the other side of 140, is none of the property included because of the protected land behind the residential properties?
Okay, so I'm going to take your first question, or your second question first. You're talking this land here?
No, keep going. So right over there, there's a couple houses there.
Yep.
That are not included, right? And then I assume it's because behind there is protected land, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, it is protected land, you're right on that score. We didn't want to alter the boundaries too much from what's there now. So we just pulled out the parcels that we know will never get developed.
Okay. So then on the other side of the road, the residential houses
Yep,
that are there.
there's a few of them.
Right, there's a few of them. Will the way that they're being taxed, will that change compared to the other side of the road?
No, they're still taxed as residential dwellings.
Okay.
Other questions and comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, why are you renaming this zone as opposed to just eliminating the zone? If it's poorly written, why are we keeping it and why don't we just get rid of it?
Well, we could rename it a simply commercial, but we thought we'd put some pizzazz on it and give it a new name, Gateway Commercial District.
Okay, how's that gonna help?
I don't think it matters one way or another. We can call it a commercial district or a C2.
So was it considered to just eliminate the zone, performance zone?
Well, no. This is your best opportunity for new economic development. And that's because just about all of your commercially zoned land is gone. It's being used. So reorienting this as a commercial economic development district is the plan.
So you say there are 22 parcels.
Yeah.
And there's 25 available acres. How many parcels are in the 25 acres?
How many?
How many parcels do the 25 acres make?
Oh gosh, I don't have that off the top of my head, but it's at least 7 or 8 vacant parcels that are available for development.
I'm talking about 7 or 8 parcels.
Yes.
That you can develop.
That you can develop, yes.
The rest are already developed.
The others have something on them, yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
How are we doing in terms of balancing like home production and commercial so that we have people coming in, like businesses coming in, to keep the tax rate down, balancing it without overbuilding? I think you mentioned something there that we're building a lot of homes. I don't know if that's...
Well, actually, we're not building a lot of homes. So I think there were only 10 building permits issued last year for single-family homes. Certainly, the Northgate project, the affordable housing project up near the Leominster town line, that added 216 housing units. Once that's all built out, that'll be 216 units.
So then what's the balances, I guess, I'm not sure if I'm asking this correctly, between getting more commerce in versus that?
Well, your tax base, it's about 10% comprised of economic, commercial and industrial development. It's about 87% residential and 3% personal property. Now, in comparing Sterling to other communities, You're right on the borderline in terms of being a bedroom community. If you did get more economic development, it would help to offset the year-to-year rise in single-family tax bills. If all 25 available acres in this district got built out, it could generate as much as $400,000 in new tax revenue every year for the town.
How are we doing getting commercial things here? How are we doing? Like, I know we don't have a sewer system. That's a problem, like you mentioned.
Well, we do have an active economic development committee, but you saw how long it took us to get the building next door occupied for commercial development. You see the Sterling Inn that's been sitting there vacant forever.
Yeah, what's happening with that?
Yeah, good question. We certainly would like to see that reused at some point. You've got Miola's, which there's a proposal to turn that into a gas station convenience store.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, yeah. So he's been looking to turn over that property for years, and he finally found someone to meet his price. But you really don't have much land left for commercial development. You've got 244 acres zoned for commercial. All but 30 acres are spoken for. And of the 30 acres you've got left for commercial development, vacant parcels, 10 of it you're not going to be able to use because of environmental constraints. So you've only got 20 acres left of vacant commercially zoned land. If we reorient this towards a commercial district, you're going to double the amount of land available for commercial development from 20, add on to 25 here, so that's 45 acres. Yes?
Just to clarify, it sounds, when we're asking about the name of the district, certainly it sounds like this district could be called commercial, but because there are certain uses that you're considering not having in there, you just have another, just call it a
Commercial too.
just to indicate that it's got some differences
Yeah.
compared to
If the name's going to be a hang-up, we'll just call it commercial too.
What's the difference between this economic development zone versus any other commercial district in this town?
Well, I told you some of the uses that we allow in our commercial districts that aren't going to be allowed in this one. So there's a difference there, and we've added some new uses based on what folks told us they wanted at the March forums. Yes, in the back.
Hey, how you doing? I'm just curious as to how the town would decide what commercial, like not the type of commercials, but how it goes out to bid to be able to be a business to apply for the commercial space that would be available to incoming companies.
How someone could come in and develop that?
No, like what would be the process that the business would have to go through to, we're allowing maybe like a brewery.
Well, they either buy the land or get it under a purchase and sale agreement, and then they would bring their development proposal to the town. Depending on what you want to do, it might be a use allowed by right, which means you simply come to the planning board for site plan approval, or if it's allowed by special permit, start off with the zoning board, get your special permit with them, and come over to the planning board for site plan review. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute too. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, economic development, as we're talking about it here, presupposes that there's an existing business that needs a place to do business. What about the aspect of economic development that starts here in people's minds. For example, if the town had a talent and skills database of everyone in town who wants to participate, writes down, what they think they're good at, examples of how they've used that skill, so it's clear they actually have it. And people who wish to can poke around and see who's got a skill that matches some of theirs, and maybe ought to contact this person and start a conversation.
Which could lead to a business or two.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
All right, anything else on this one, or we're going to move on to the next one? We good on this one? All right, move on, please. So as I said, your commercial districts allow for residential development. The vast majority of commercial districts in Massachusetts towns do not allow residential development in them. And what's happened is slowly over the years, much of your commercial land has been slowly eaten up by residential development. Of all the parcels in town that are zoned for commercial development, 42% of them are used for residential development. Now, as I said, you've only really got 20 acres of commercially zoned land available for development. That'll go up to 45 if we adopt the commercial or the Gateway Enterprise District or commercial too. But for what land we have left that's commercially zoned, you really ought to be using it for commercial purposes. So our proposed solution is to delete residential development as a permitted use in the commercial districts. Questions? Comments?
I assume that it wasn't used for commercial and it was being, you were building houses on it or residential because we didn't have any commercial people wanting to use that commercial zone.
Well, I wouldn't assume that.
Okay.
I would
Then
assume
why-
that
then
people
why did we
said,
do-
well, looks like a nice spot to build a home.
Okay, and the planning board and the zoning board said, nobody else has asked for it, so let's go give it to them.
Well, it's not like they could say no. It's in your table of uses as a permitted use, which means just go get your building permit. Town, it's not like the town could say no to them.
Okay.
See,
But how many people actually went in there asking for commercial uses? Yeah. I mean, I know you can't answer it because it goes back years, but still, I mean, I still have an issue with, if somebody wanted to use that commercially, they probably would have gone and asked, as opposed to the residential.
well, that's a hypothetical. People go by the table of uses in your zoning, and if something's allowed by right, town needs to let it happen. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of what I was trying to ask in terms of having more houses built. You said there are only 10, but with this, if this is in there, then they could eat up the commercial land.
What you have left, yes.
Right, so if we need more commercial or more commerce, but we need to delete that, right? Because people will then use it for building houses. And then we
More
won't
than
have
likely,
any-
yes.
And then we won't have any land for
And
development.
then if we want a new commercial land, we're looking at residentially zoned land and turning that into commercial land, because you've already eaten up your available commercial land with residential development. It's not good planning. Questions, comments?
Do we have any people coming to bring us commerce? Are there people wanting to have businesses here that we don't know about or that?
Well, it's not like I can document that, but I can say anecdotally, businesses have kicked the tires on a number of Sterling properties, and have decided to go elsewhere.
And why is that?
Lack of municipal sewer, lengthy disjointed permitting process. And we're going to get to that next, I believe. Moving on. Number 3. Okay, as I said before, the process for permitting economic development projects is disjointed, lengthy, and often leads to conflicting conditions of approval. So, if you've got an economic development project in town that you want to propose, and it requires a special permit from the zoning board, and then site plan review with the planning board, you're going to the zoning board, sometimes spending 2, 3, 4 months getting your special permit with them. Then you're coming to the planning board for site plan review, spending 2 or 3 months with us, getting your site plan approval. Taken together, that is a lengthy permitting process, and businesses want to get up and running. Time is money. And another problem with the current situation is sometimes the conditions that the zoning board puts on their special permits, they conflict with the conditions that the planning board puts on their special permit. So then you've got a conundrum as to which set of conditions take effect. So our solution, and this is a solution that has been successfully employed in other communities, is to have, for projects that require both special permit and site plan review, have one board handle both at the same time. So that would be the planning board. Have one board handle both permitting processes at the same time. For a special permit, they would make their findings of fact first and determine whether the use is compatible with the neighborhood, and then they would move on to site plan review, which is working with the developer on a project design to help it integrate into the neighborhood as best it can. That's where abutter input is critical. When projects are proposed, and you're notified as an abutter, or even if you're just interested in development on its own, you need to go to these hearings and give your input. If you're an abutter and you're going to be impacted by a development that wants to come to town, you need to come to the hearings and share your concerns so that the planning board can work with the developer and come up with a site design that hopefully mitigates your concerns, whether they be noise, or screening, or traffic, or what have you. With me on that?
That's not always true. We've had the planning board meetings on developments, and they went through. Nobody listened to us.
Well, it largely depends on who's on the board at any given time.
It shouldn't matter who's on the board.
You're right. You're right. So let's move on to the next one. Were the questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just so instead of having a better process of communication between the two departments, we would rather put all of the permitting power on the zoning board for those
planning board.
on the planning board. So
Yeah.
who's ever on the planning board would decide what projects can go in ultimately for the special permitted uses.
Okay, so let's get clear on how projects are allowed in town. If an economic development project is allowed by right, just come to the planning board for your site plan approval. If it's allowed by special permit, that's different. Right now, the zoning board handles special permits, and if they decide that the use is not compatible with the neighborhood, they can say, no, we don't want this. You're disapproved. So that's the role of the special permit. And the planning board would be taking on that role as well as site plan review. So, one thing I wanted to mention on that, bear with me here. Okay, so at the end of July, we had a meeting with town council, the planning board and the zoning board and the select board. And we talked a bit about the permitting process. It was an hour-long discussion. And you can watch the meeting on the local cable access channel. It was July 31st this year. When asked about how to best handle the permitting for these economic development projects, town council said, the better approach is to have one entity do both. That's 36 minutes into the meeting for those of you playing at home. She also said in an email to the town administrator, the better approach is for the bylaw to require that when a project is subject to both special permit and site plan review, that the review should be conducted by the same board, whether it be the zoning board or the planning board. Also sought an opinion from the Regional Planning Commission that's been around for 50 years, which Sterling's been a long-standing member. Asked the same question, and their planning director said, I would recommend holding the two hearings simultaneously by one board and changing the use table where the ZBA only does special permits that don't require site plan review. So this is a good government practice that's been employed successfully in other communities. Sterling does it, Clinton does it this way. As you can see, they have much more economic development than we do. Did that get at what you were?
It sounds like it's a recommendation from someone that's on the board that could possibly benefit from having it all be on one side.
I don't see how.
How do you mean? Putting all the power within one board to permit those permits would not,
Well, if you want to spend 6 months getting your special permit from the zoning board and then another 3 months with planning to get your site plan review.
No, I understand, and that's what my first question was, is what is the process in which the communication lines are open for each individual to talk to each other and keep an electronic file of where we're at in a database that shows us a proper planning that's being communicated to get us through the process?
Any special permit application is shared with the planning board. Any site plan that comes through the door with the planning board gets shared with the zoning board. So both boards have an opportunity to comment on either application.
And that's the process we have now, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm asking, is there a channel in which a specific process is laid out that each person can show red receipts or however it may be to communicate properly with one another to improve this rate we can complete permits at?
I'm not sure if I'm following you.
So things are like, are you familiar with like Toyota's 5S system, where everything has a place, you follow the system every single time? So it'd just be like walking through a software program and keeping up with the permitting process as it goes through.
We monitor special permits as they make their way through the permitting process with the zoning board. And in the end, when they issue their decision, we get it. And that lets us know that they're going to be coming to us for site plan review at some point.
Okay, so is there a way to like take accountability and document that process to improve it so that way it can get done? What's the bottleneck on what takes the process so long?
Because they start out getting a special permit with the zoning board, and then they go to the planning board for site plan review.
No, I understand the process of it. Well, I'm just asking if you can explain what takes that so long in between those three things. You fill out a form, you bring it in, you have them review it, and it gets passed forward, correct?
The process begins when the applicant files with one or the other board.
Okay. So I guess I'm just wondering what is so difficult about that process and it taking so long?
The boards.
Oh, well,
Once a month or
the
twice a
boards,
month?
well, yeah, boards meet once a month.
Okay, so,
For projects, for site plans, we need time to have all the staff in the departments to review a plan. We have a consulting engineer that needs time to review the plan. Those comments, the review comments from the town department heads and the planning board's consulting engineer, those are all documented. They're given to the applicant. Then they need to spend a couple months or however long it takes them to revise their plan to address all those comments. And it's just, it takes time.
So it sounds like people are doing their due diligence to keep the standards held to a very high caliber in the town. So that
It's
process,
still a lengthy permitting process. Now, this would be a way to consolidate the process for both special permit and site plan review so that they apply for both at the same time, and it cuts down the time by having one board do the approval for both.
But it doesn't sound as though any of the process is going to change. It's just going to go to one board. So why wouldn't it make sense to change the process that would allow you to apply for a special permit and a site approval at the same time? Both plant boards are working on it at the same time, and then you get an answer more quickly instead of only one board being involved.
Okay, well, they do have that option. They can apply concurrently. I haven't seen that very often here in town. In fact, the folks who want to put the gas station at Neola's, they did apply concurrently. So they'll be dealing with the zoning board at the same time that they're dealing with the planning board for site plan review. So that is an option. Joe?
So I was at the meeting with town council, and what you said is true, but there wasn't one answer. She said we could work simultaneously at the same time to process these things through a little bit quicker. And I will tell you right now, you might have said communication is good. Communication isn't great between the two boards. I think that needs to be fixed a little bit. And if we go side by side, maybe we can fix it a little bit better. But communication isn't good, and I think during that meeting, if you watch the whole meeting, you'll notice that town council did say that a lot of towns will do it at the same time. This process between the two boards. Okay? And then
Okay,
I just wanted
if you
to
like having it, the zoning board handle special permits still, and the planning board handle site plan still. I suppose we could revise the bylaw to encourage people to apply for both permits at the same time. What's that? Well, I don't know about that. I'd have to run that by town council.
And then I just wanted to, one other thing on this is
Yes,
on
sure.
the special permit. If we look at what's being proposed for changes, I'm not sure if it's coming up later, but we've removed a lot of the special permits. I think it feels that way, at least what I can see, away and create a lot of by rights to probably take away some of this. So I'm also concerned about that, is that we have less input on stuff that's coming into town because it's being a by right and just one board put it in and take care of it. So I would like to really kind of look at those special permit
Yeah, I don't
spots
think
too.
we moved anything from special permit to by right.
Yes, you did. You move contracted yard, we did it. The town meeting that was at the airport, we moved it from no to special permit, and then
Okay,
this
well,
one
that
from
was
special
before my
permit
time.
to
We're not doing it
yes.
this time.
You're going from some special permit to yes, by right use in commercial.
In this proposal?
Yeah, in the new bylaws, yes. For commercial.
Okay, why don't you see me afterwards and point out exactly which item you're talking about? We'll talk about it. Yes, ma'am.
I want to be clear, you said earlier that sometimes the zoning board has different conditions from the planning board, and it can be contradictory and a conundrum.
And that's happening.
And so that's one of the things that this solution may deal with that, because even if people are doing, even if somebody does go through concurrently, they may not, you're not eliminating or you're still going to have that conundrum.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we want to do this, to avoid the potential for conflict between the zoning board's conditions and the planning board's conditions. So this proposal would do things. Expedite the permitting process by having one board handle both permits, and it does away with the possibility of contradictory conditions of approval.
How much input did the zoning board have in this? Did they have any input in this plan at all? Did you call them up and
yes.
say, let's all have a meeting and let's
I
sit
met with the
down?
zoning board.
So what I should be hearing is the zoning board should be saying, this is great, let's go ahead and do it.
No, I've met with the zoning board as part of this process. I will tell you that they're not big on it.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like they had a whole lot of input in this plan.
Well, they haven't come to any planning board meetings when we've been working on this. I've shared drafts with them going all the way back to July. So.
Are they able, I mean, your meetings are at 9 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the
No, they're at 6:30 at
Okay,
night.
on that case, they should be able to come.
And the zoning board chairman stops in my office weekly,
Okay,
and we talk about this weekly.
so it doesn't sound like.
If there's contradictions from the zoning board and the planning board, that's data that we can collect and research and do away with those contradictories. Because I'm sure if we went back through all of the data that we have and the town records of it, we'd be able to find the contradictories and put those in there and include them so that way we can make the permitting process easier for people to get through them.
Well, you're thinking like an engineer and not a planner. The conditions that are imposed by the zoning board, if they conflict with the conditions imposed by the conditions imposed by the zoning board on the special permit, if they conflict with the conditions imposed on the site plan by the planning board, then the applicant needs to appeal to one board or the other and say, listen, the other board doesn't like this, can we do away with this condition? And that's more time.
So how does that fall on the applicant when that's an issue between the towns? That's the two boards that need to solve that before they send it back.
Well, again, this whole thing wouldn't happen if you had one board handling both. So that's our proposal, yes.
If we're hoping and wishing for economic development here in town, it seems to me you want to be efficient so that people coming here that are kicking the tires, it's taken 6 months to get anything off the ground. I'd go to another town. We need to do this and be efficient about it. And if somebody doesn't like it, they've got to get with the program here and look at what the purpose is. We're trying to bring commerce into the town, correct? I mean, that's what we're doing, economic development.
As I said before, this is a good government practice that has been employed successfully by other towns. If you want to keep doing the same thing, the same way, and get the same result, then vote against this. I'm going to take that gentleman next.
Yeah, so you've been here in town for a couple of years now, and can you cite some specific examples of conflicts that have occurred between the zoning board and the planning board?
Yes. There have been conflicts regarding whether there should be a natural buffer between properties or whether it's better to have fencing as a buffer. We've had some landscaping companies where the planning board has conditioned their approval on putting up a fence to screen it from neighbors. And in some instances, that's run afoul of zoning board approvals where they want it to be, just keep the natural vegetation. So that's one example. Yes, sir.
This is a comment, not really a question. For those who don't know, I serve as chair of the zoning board, and I'm not speaking tonight on behalf of the board because the board has not yet taken a position on Mr. Wallace's proposals. Speaking simply as a resident and taxpayer. So the town planner has submitted a very comprehensive set of proposals, including this one, to promote the goal of economic development. And that's fine. I support economic development. But I have a concern about the process that the town employs to make that determination. As I understand it, the proposals, the town planner's proposals, were submitted and considered and evaluated by the planning board. And I believe that the planning board has supported and approved that goal of economic development and has endorsed, at least implicitly, pursuing that goal. The problem that I'm concerned about is if you have a board that is on the one hand an advocate and a proponent of economic development, it's difficult for that particular board or agency to also serve as the permit granting authority. Because in my view, the permit granting authority should be, as far as humanly possible, as independent and objective as possible. And I think it's difficult for a board to wear two hats, so to speak, to be the advocate for economic development, the proponent of economic development on the one hand, and on the other hand being that neutral arbiter about whether a particular commercial use should be approved in the first place. There are a lot of other considerations besides the applicant for commercial development. That's one consideration. But there are also other considerations. The abutters, people who live in proximity to the proposed development, or anyone in the town who has a concern for a variety of reasons about a particular commercial project. So I think, in my view at least, it would be better for the ZBA to make that threshold determination about whether a particular commercial use should be allowed in the first place. And if it's allowed, then it would move on to the planning board for the technical process, the site plan review, etc. And I have a similar concern about the next one you're going to talk about, Steve, in terms of multifamily housing for similar reasons. So
yeah,
it would be my view to...
The multifamily one, that's likely to be pulled back if we get the grant to help us rewrite our multifamily housing bylaw. Yes, sir.
Following on Mr. Fox's statement, I too am an advocate for some additional commercial development. This piece of property that you talked on earlier, I know that part of it has just changed hands from the Christophs to another party. I don't know how, you didn't explain whether that party was on board with this commercial entity, if you will, commercial proposal. So I'd like to hear something more, a little bit about that. The next thing I'd like to mention is that I like the fact that we have two boards looking at this thing instead of one board. Two boards give you a little bit of a different perspective on it. Secondly is the business that you're proposing is going to be here for a long, long time in many cases. I've been to many ribbon cutting ceremonies in Sterling. Those businesses are no longer here. The buildings are still here, and they are other businesses, but they're no longer here. So, it's important that we look at these businesses that are going to come into town and we make sure that they're the right fit for the town of Sterling and not just some off-the-wall type of thing.
Thank you. Regarding the Christoph property, I don't know who bought it. If they want to come in and talk to me about their development options, I'd be glad to. So folks, I do see a split here. If you like the permitting system the way it is, with 2 sets of eyes evaluating an economic development project, then vote against this and keep your current permitting process. If you think it would help to streamline the permitting process and avoid the possibility of contradictions between the 2 conditions of approval, then you would vote for our proposal. So, Maureen.
I thought we were here tonight to provide input to this draft proposal.
And you are.
Maybe you want to rewrite some of this. Consider rewriting this to be more amenable to the concerns that people raise.
All the feedback you're giving us tonight goes right to
Well,
the
it sounds
vote.
like you're going to put this forward to the town meeting without any modifications.
Well, we may not. Like I said, all the input we
what you
get
said.
tonight is going to be considered by the planning board at its December and January meetings.
Please do that.
Maureen.
I know this might be thinking, outside of the box, but for a long time I've been a proponent of boards and committees working together. So in a situation like this, isn't there a way that when you have something come in, the planning board and the ZBA all sit at the same table and map it out for the applicant, what their needs are from each of those boards, and then have them come back? I mean, somebody could bring cookies. It could be a nice evening.
I'll have to remember that. 10 minutes, not a bad idea. Let me write that one down. Wallace, hold on.
That's my sister.
Wallace?
Yes.
I think maybe you're hearing from this group that a compromise in the proposal and not bring it to town meeting as an up or down vote, but perhaps one to streamline the process, which I heard here pretty loudly tonight. Maybe you'd get better reception. And to the earlier gentleman's comment, he thought we were here tonight to provide feedback on this, not to be advised to vote up or down on it. That's right.
Correct.
Thank you. So perhaps we could reconsider this one and come to town meeting with, here's how we're going to streamline the process, as opposed to change to have only one.
Well, we just got a constructive idea from your select board member. So, again, if you've got a better idea as to how to do this, we're all ears. Yes.
I'm in support of the concept that Maureen spoke of, where both boards get involved at the earliest possible stage. And I'd like, my recollection, which I confirmed by speaking with past, I think, 25-year planning board chair, Bob Pertano, in the past, in situations where there's a special permit by the ZBA has signing authority on the final site plan. Currently, I don't see that happening. So what happens is a special permit gets granted, there's a sketch on the table, the public's there in a public forum, they think they have a voice, and a lot of things get discussed, and then if a positive decision is made to support a permit, it gets posted at the Registry of Deeds. It often doesn't contain the intent of the public hearing in full. It's a little difficult to capture it all. So it ultimately needs to be formulated into a drawing. And if there's no checks and balances in place to sign off by both boards, you can miss the dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's, which is often not protecting the applicant, but it's protecting the abutters.
And quite a few times, the sketch that the zoning board sees is conceptual, and it gets fleshed out during the site plan review process, and it's not quite the same thing at the end, is it?
That's true, and I fully expect that going into it as an engineer, but I think there are a lot of unsuspecting townspeople that go to the public hearing at the special permit hearing, and they think it's near final, or the intent expressed by the sketch is representative of what will be in the site plan. So you end up with ocean cargo cans counting a number 6, and then by the time it goes to another board, the number jumps to 14. The size increase, the height increases. There's a little bit of mission creep that happens. So it behooves the townspeople to show up to both boards and recognize and understand the process.
Or we have a joint hearing between the two boards so that they hear about all the aspects right then and there.
Right, and it's a more seamless way to respect both the townspeople and also avoid conflict between the boards, because when the first board isn't honored, these things get done in series. And what I've seen is the Zoning Board of Appeals is not honored by the planning board, and it's not necessarily a malicious thing, it's a process flaw. And that's the lack of having cookies together. And it's the lack of the checks and balances, which comes from the townspeople staying engaged through the entire process and understanding that the first meeting isn't really the final site plan.
That's a good point, Brian.
Thanks.
Okay.
Joe, I was definitely wrong on the special permit for the contractor's pad. There's an open air that got switched and a few others. And one was a major commercial development, I thought was listed here.
Yeah.
And now it's a yes.
Pat, we're going to put that back to special permit.
Okay. In my notes, I was hoping to say if we could really look at development as low impact and high impact activities and be able to judge them based on how they're going to affect the surrounding areas a little bit more. That's all.
Can you write down joint hearings as well as meetings?
Joint. All right. So we're going to move on to the next one.
Mr. Wallace,
Yes.
since I see a bunch of the audience thinning out here due to the length of the meeting here, is it possible for you to reconsider moving the last topic up to next? Because that
Do people want to talk about the MBTA? All right, let's make a party of it. Yeah, jump ahead if you will. Keep going. All right, stop right there. Okay. MBTA zoning district, the gift that keeps on giving. Three years ago, the state passed what's known as the MBTA Communities Act. And as part of that act, they require every MBTA community and every MBTA adjacent community to set aside an area of town where you allow multifamily housing by right, as opposed to by special permit as you currently allow it in Sterling. With me? Okay. So, Sterling is considered an MBTA adjacent community, simply because we abut Leominster. Even though the Leominster train station is in North Leominster, and no matter how you cut it, it's a 10-mile car ride to get there. But we're still included in this law. In Sterling's case, we have to find enough land to accommodate the possibility of building 156 new multifamily housing units at a density of 15 units per acre. How can you build at that density when you don't have municipal sewer? You can't. The state did not take into account any accommodation for the number of towns in our particular region that are affected by this law but don't have the municipal infrastructure to serve it. So in the absence of municipal sewer, it would be the Title V septic regulations that would be the limiting factor in terms of the density. Municipalities that do not adopt such zoning are no longer eligible for a variety of state and housing infrastructure grants. And we're probably, if we don't adopt this, we're probably likely to be sued. Next slide.
Clarification on that previous slide.
Yes, sir.
You refer to us as an MBTA adjacent community. Actually, I think we're adjacent to small town. by the language in the guidelines. And that's what you had in the draft proposal, so I wonder if you could clear that up.
Every mention that I've seen of it on the state website lists Sterling as an MBTA adjacent community.
Adjacent small town.
If that distinction matters.
The distinction does matter, according to how they...
We've got the same, we're still required to have the same number of units, whether we're a MBTA adjacent or MBTA adjacent small town. They told us how many units we need to accommodate.
I understand that, but they do make a distinction between the different types of towns. And
Okay.
we're considered a small town.
What is the distinction?
Yeah.
What difference does it make?
There really is.
5 different types of towns.
The number of units we have to accommodate stays the same. So, next slide,
Ask you a
please.
question. What grants do we get, and what do they equate to? How much are they? What grants do they get to Sterling?
State infrastructure grants and state housing grants. There's the One Stop for Growth grant program that has 7 or 8 different infrastructure grants. We just applied for one over the summer to make some improvements to the village center, new sidewalks, fix the drainage, new landscaping, lighting. We didn't get it.
So do we need these grants?
Why?
Because of this?
No. Because the town, because the state only has a limited amount of funds to spread.
So the law spells out 4 different types of grants, 4 grants that are available. What grants of those have we applied for in the last 2 years?
We've applied to the One Stop for Growth infrastructure grant the past 2 years running.
That's the only one?
That's it. In my time here.
Okay.
And did we receive it? We didn't receive it, you said this past year. The year
No.
before, did we receive
No.
it? So you're talking about one grant that we've never received, we could lose the option for money.
Okay.
I'm just asking, just so I understand, is that what you're saying? Or are there other grants that we have applied for that we have received or are likely to receive? Because that seems unlikely if we keep...
Not from this program, but I will tell you that your DPW has identified several long-term infrastructure projects that are going to be big money, and it would certainly help out if we got some grant money to help fund those.
But there's no guarantee that...
There's no guarantee.
Yeah.
So, if we're talking about why we are jumping through hoops to comply with the state law for a bunch of grants that we haven't gotten in the past, that's a valid point. Okay, let me continue on here and we'll, okay. So, as I said, it's simply not possible to build at a density of 15 units per acre without municipal sewer. And the state understands this. We looked at properties, trying to practically comply with this. We looked at properties near the Leominster town line, because that's the closest point in which Sterling might have eventual access to a municipal sewer line. The municipal sewer line for Leominster provides sewer for the Northgate housing development. So we looked around that area and we could not find a property owner who was willing to host this overlay district. And we weren't about to put this overlay district on somebody's property who didn't want it. Hold on. So we looked closer at the Northgate property and saw that it had enough land to possibly accommodate the number of units that were required to zone for, and put that in as a proposal to the state, and they said no, because the road serving Northgate is technically located in Leominster. So I said to the gentleman with the state, so you're not going to let us put this district in the most practical place in town. You'd rather see us zone a piece of property somewhere in town that doesn't have municipal sewer. It's not likely to ever have municipal sewer, just as long as we allow for the possibility of building the 156 units, and their answer was yes. So they are looking for small towns like ours for theoretical compliance. Zoning enough land that, should sewer ever come there, we could build the number of units required. We are not required to make sure that those units get actually built.
What type of units are they? Is this low income or is this regular?
No, that would be up to the developer. It would be multifamily.
How is this going to affect our taxes in the schools?
Well, we'll get there. So, we did identify 60 acres in the northeast corner of town where a property owner was willing to accommodate this district. So let's go over to the next slide. And there it is. There's the district right up there. Next slide, please. There it is up there at the end of Ford Road, 60 acres. The property owner is planning on taking 20 of those acres, putting 10 acres around the existing house out there, and then using another 10 acres for an estate lot in back. So that leaves 40 acres for this district. The state tells you what needs to be in your bylaw. What they give you the leeway on is your dimensional requirements. So we have a requirement that 75% of that district be set aside as permanently protected open space. So if we're starting with 40 acres and we take 3/4 of it out as permanently protected open space, you're left with 10 acres. That is enough to get the theoretical compliance with the state. I don't know how I'm going to explain this at town meeting. But in terms of the practical implications, Title V sewer would be what rules the day. And that would be about 4 units per acre, 4 units times 10 acres. Tops, you could expect 40 houses out there.
Steve, how much does that represent in acreage in that red?
Excuse me?
How many acres is that red right
That's
there?
60 acres.
All right, so where is the acreage where you're saying you could possibly use it?
Okay. So the property owner is going to take out some land down at the south of it.
Yeah.
And in terms of what gets used for the 10 acres available for development, it would most likely be over in this vicinity.
What about wetlands?
They would stay away from the stream and the pond there in the wetlands.
I walk that all the time because I live right there.
Yeah.
And I don't see how they could possibly dig that up and call it home.
Well, that'll be up to the developer to make it
It's
work.
just, there's a lot of wet down there.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. Sir.
How are other MTBA adjacent small towns dealing with it? We can't be the only one that has this
No,
problem.
we're not.
Is everybody just saying yes?
Princeton found an area of town that they've set aside. Once again, they have enough land to theoretically comply should municipal sewer ever come down to that portion of Princeton, but it's never going to. So they're in the same situation as we are. Title V will rule the day in terms of the ultimate density. Lancaster, they are still evaluating parcels for their district, so is Westminster. The town of Holden has said, no, we're not going to comply.
Has anybody said, well, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, but we're not getting
Yes,
anything out of it?
town of Milton.
Yeah.
Right.
Lawsuit.
Yep, and they're being sued. Okay, so I'm going to take the one back first.
Two questions, actually, two points. That particular piece of property borders Lancaster and Leominster, and both of those areas have their town wells on them. So if you were to put something in there and then try to put some kind of a jet vat system or something like that in there, similar to what Dana Hill has and what Washacom Village has, you know, you're going to be compromising their well water, quite frankly. So that's not really a great location. Secondly is, and you touched on this, there are other communities in the state of Massachusetts that are fighting this. One of them is Holden, one of them is Milton. We all know about that one. That one's before the SJC. And then there's Hanover, and there's, I think, a half a dozen more. I'm not sure of all of them. Do we know where the status of the Milton case is right now? And are they going to force this issue? Or do you think that that Milton is going to prevail, and maybe this whole thing will kind of go away for people like us?
Well, the Milton case is still in litigation. I won't even predict how that's going to end out. My charge as your town planner is to find a way for Sterling to comply. Now, being a planner for 35 years, this is not the first unfunded state mandate I've seen come down the pipe. So my philosophy has always been, if we're going to comply, I'm going to try to find the easiest, most painless way to comply. And that's what we've done here. So,
It's the way you framed our planning and zoning, how it's a shambles, the idea that you could put that much housing where you're talking about is equally batty. If you've driven down there, the roads, we can't even have, the road has rocks on it. We can't even get a road fixed. The infrastructure is wet, there's no infrastructure for it. It could be a worse place, excuse me, sir. It couldn't be a worse place in town to pick. It is extremely wet. There's all sorts of issues. The roads are atrocious already. There's no infrastructure for it.
The drainage erodes the power lines, and they're having to constantly replace them. I can't imagine that drainage will not become a greater and greater issue.
So, on our property in the wintertime, Steve, we float the dogs down in the kayak around the house because of water coming off from Country Club and Sandy Ridge across Jim's property.
Okay.
And
So understand that I've spent 2 years trying to find a property owner willing to host this. And we found one. Are they ever going to build 156 units out there? Not likely.
Have you looked at the site? Or do you just see it on paper? Have you actually gone out there to look at the property?
I have not walked it.
That you should do that.
Yes, you should,
You should do
because
that.
our property is there,
I'll take it.
right there.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we'll go over here. Yes, a lot of questions over here too. Joe Soba, 7 Cynthia Lane. I'm somewhat in a butter to the property. I think somehow this is maybe an academic exercise, because I know what the town needs to do. They gotta comply. That property, because there's no sewer, it's really not developable to the extent that it needs to be. There's wetlands that just doesn't accommodate, the type of density that we're talking about. I really think we should comply with it because there are grants, there's infrastructure stuff that we need to get done. I think that's what the town, I can't speak for the town administration, but I think they want to go there. But it's an academic exercise. We've got to do this for the state. And then we can say, okay, we did our due diligence. We can't do this, but we complied with what you said. So
they're on paper.
Right. We've done what we can do. It's not going to be developable to the 156 units. It's not going to happen. There's no way, no how.
Let me take the remaining back here.
So I'm Jean DeRosa from Turtle Lane. So I'm wondering that pool of water, I know in Turtle Lane we had to provide
some pretty sizable space for the turtles. So I'm wondering, like, if this is really actually a good spot, because we are turtle central over in that area. And so the turtle people will come in and say, this is all conservation here, and you can't build here because there's turtles. So maybe that might be a good spot, and I would be interested what the turtle people have to say.
Well, like I said, 75% of the district is going to be permanently protected open space. Yes.
Is it possible, you have that other site you said, but the state said it is partly in Leominster and all this baloney. Can't the state do a waiver if that's a better site? Can you do that? I mean, why not?
There is no waiver process.
How about another road into that?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible of the site that's by Leominster to apply for a grant to get some of the infrastructure, or is that ridiculous? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg.
Well, we typically don't apply for grants that are going to serve someone's private interest. That would be up to the developer to come up with the infrastructure. Having it out there would allow the developer to tie into Leominster a heck of a lot easier than
this place.
Yeah.
What if we made a road from North Road Road into the, North Road? Because that would be coming from Sterling into Sterling to know where those apartments are.
And we looked at crossing the properties on North Road Road, and the property owners don't want it. I'm going to take the gentleman back. You, wait a minute. Yeah, you.
Oh, he's going to me. So Stephen, when you say that theoretically you can't build on that property, that's for today. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to extend for the next 5 years or 10 years. We, in the neighborhood even, we saw where a house went up where the original builder wouldn't even build a house because of the water and the wetlands and all of that. Did they follow all the rules once they built the house? Yeah, sure. But you can't tell me that they're never going to build on that property, especially when we have a developer who actually owns the property. You know, so that makes the difference, because there are ways around septic. You mentioned Washacom Village, what they did, and I have no problem with additional housing and stuff. I do have a problem with the state as far as this MBTA thing. This is ridiculous, and I think as a community, we have to stand up to this.
How can we stand up to them?
Hold on. So, you know, I've advised the select board to have a conversation with town council and check in with Holden as to how they plan to not comply and how they're going to attack it. So I would suggest following through on that. Yes, sir.
Can you touch back on the taxes and what it would do for the school system having those if they were built?
Well, it would depend on what type of housing gets built out there and what it's assessed at. But I can tell you that for every housing unit in town, you've got 0.7 children in it, 0.7 times the 40 units. That I'm thinking you could get in there realistically. That would be 28 school children.
40. Which is 1.5 classrooms, depending on the grade, or multiple teachers at multiple grades, depending on, so when you talk about it will tax the schools to have 28 more, right.
And also,
it will tax,
well, and also that's the minimum amount that it would be.
Minimum
if
amount.
they decided that they're going to smash in 156
If
units
they
out
wanted
there,
to build
they wanted
12
to go
stories
up.
high, yeah.
Yes, and then the magic question, is it going to be low income?
No.
Some number of it has to be.
No, is it?
It doesn't have to be.
That would be the developer's choice if he wants to make that. Understand that right now they could build low-income housing anywhere in town and ignore our zoning bylaws altogether because we don't have 10% of our housing stock deemed affordable by the state. Once your town has 10% of its housing stock deemed affordable by the state, units on the subsidized housing inventory, then you can control your own fate and have your zoning stand up. Yes?
I was in the Board of Health meeting that you were at, and it was suggested by the Board of Health chair, okay, to tell the state to go take their own land, okay, that they own in the town and build on your own land and see how successful you are. We need to fight back, okay? You need to call Senator Durant and get a meeting in this town hall right here, okay? And voice your opinions to the state and go back to your governor and tell her we don't want your stuff here.
Thank you for your input. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
The state's not gonna go for 40 units. They want 175. 156.
They said that all we have to do is zone for the possibility that someday, magically, there'll be a sewer line there and you can get the 156 units.
On 10 acres.
At a density of 15 units per acre.
What's that, high rise?
If you want to visualize what 15 units per acre looks like, it's Northgate. Yes, back there. Yes.
Oh, she's up. Hi. What is your plan for emergency services, like police, fire department, EMTs, and paramedics? Because if you increase the population of Sterling, you're going to need to increase those as well. And from my understanding, that kind of stuff comes from taxes.
Yes, it does.
So would that...
It would depend on what's proposed back there and what kind of improvements need to be made. Certainly, there's going to need to be improvements made to Ford Road.
That's my property.
Yes, ma'am.
100% it's my property.
The lady next to you, did she have something?
No, I was trying to get it onto her.
Yes.
So isn't there an argument with the state for the Northgate property to fulfill this requirement? Because on the NBTA community website, it mentions the whole purpose of this is for people to have access to the MBTA, and they should be a half a mile and, you know, near a commuter rail, a bus station, a ferry, and there is a bus that goes down that road that goes to the R&B. All those things, I think, is an argument to say we already have this. Why do we need to build something else that doesn't have that? You know, there's an argument on their website that mentions single car families, you know, it being better for the climate, that these people wouldn't have to use their cars to get to the MBTA access, but they would for this, you know, this scenario where we already have this situation where it is closer to shops, it is closer to all these things that they're stating on the website, yet we're gonna change like the rural character of Sterling because they're saying no over like this little flop, you know, of this road. Like, why can't they work with us that we've done this years ago because it was like a requirement, and why can't we just make some accommodations and make this work? Especially when it lists out on their website, you know, all of the things I just mentioned. That the whole point of this is to have easier access to an MBTA.
We don't have any MBTA stops in town. The nearest one is in North Leominster.
Well, the thing is, there is a bus. So MBTA also talks about being able to take a bus to get to, yes, public transportation to get to the bus station, which is also the same train station. There's a bus that goes to the R&B, and that's right where Northgate is. So why couldn't there be a situation worked out where that schedule has more stops or more frequency that could bring them to the train station?
And I've spent the last 6 months trying to convince them that the most practical site would be up near the Northgate area.
Well, is that part of the argument, you know, or is it more, oh, we don't
That
have...
was part of that was part of the
septic.
case we made for using that area.
Well, it just seems like that's written.
I can show you the letter that we
No, no, I'm
submitted
not
to the
doubting
state
that
and the
you
letter we got back from
did
them
that.
saying, no.
So none of that, they don't care about that, like, that just, that boggles my mind.
In back. Yes, ma'am.
So I just had a couple, one of the things I saw in our own master plan from 2021, master plan goals, was to maintain Sterling's small town rural character and ensure that new housing creation is harmonious with the existing community. That's one of our town goals. So you telling me that, well, we could put 40 units on 10 acres down a small road that needs improvements which will affect our current community members' properties, seems like we're not holding true to our own master plan goals that we decided in this town. So that's one that I don't know if that master plan's changed since 2021, but I think
No, it hasn't.
yeah, it was a little more long-term, right? The intent of the law, which I think Mrs. Tufts is talking about here, the intent of the law, which is both in the guidelines that the state has put out on the state's website for us to take a look at, as well as through the law itself. The intent of the law is for us to put this somewhere where they have access, where there is community, where there is, let's see, sidewalks or access to the highway quickly. I'm wondering, we have property owned, I think, potentially by the town, if I'm not mistaken, over by the police station. We have other small pockets. Is it possible if we decide as a town that we even want to comply with this, which I'm not sure if we've even decided that as a town. I hear tonight that it seems like some mixed reviews. So I echo what we said about the last thing we were talking about, that maybe it's not a consideration that we're moving this forward to a vote. It's a consideration of how do we decide what we even want in the first place. But I think if there's the option to say we take maybe just, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 acres from 10, 15 places around town where we can build a few multifamily homes like we're already seeing being done, to get us enough to, I don't know, pick a number, 156, I hope not, but whatever. Will that also comply if it's not all in one large acreage in one location? That's the question I have. And then the last, in terms of affordable housing, you said 10% for our town-wide. If we're at 10%, let's just say now, which I don't know if we are above or below or whatever, if we're at 10% and you add 40 more units, then you'd have to take 10% of that, so some of them would have to be affordable housing to stay at the 10%?
No, well, in order to keep pace with our current level, we're like at 9%, then yeah, some of those would need to be affordable. But they're not, the law does not require a developer to provide affordable housing. It's multifamily housing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one thing. Secondly, I want you to know that the select board are going to be discussing this matter at their next meeting on Wednesday night, November 20th. They're my bosses. They're the ones who tell me whether they want me to find a way to comply or we're not going to comply. So if you've got concerns, I ask you to come to that meeting. And your other question, whether it all has to be in one spot, it doesn't.
Okay.
So we could spend the next year trying to spot out 10 acres here, 10 acres there.
To me, that sounds great while we wait for some of these court cases to figure themselves out and find out if we even have to go through with this. I would love to waste time.
Mr. Wallace, you mentioned it, and I think it's a great idea to offer up to the town on the town website the response that you got from the state. And the reason that I recommend that is, unless you have additional information that I haven't seen yet, it is not a no. It's here's 5 conditions for that overlay district around the North Gate that you have to satisfy in order for the state to be happy about that. Now, I could misread that, but opening this letter up to this entire town, there are a lot of smart people in this room tonight, perhaps they can look at it and help you figure out a way of getting your original plan, which was that overlay district around Northgate. We killed two birds with one stone that way.
Joe, what I'll do is put up on the town's website our initial proposal to the state and their response. Brian.
In line with Joe's comment, and as a follow-up to the mention of speaking with town council and Holden, et cetera, I think when you speak to town council, I think it may be a two-pronged approach. One might be kind of the Holden approach and just say, no, we're not going to do it. That's one option. The other is to challenge this ruling that the Northgate option isn't viable. So you need to consider both, because in the case of saying no, like Holden, you're putting yourself at risk of litigation. You could alternatively with Northgate, you can initiate a case and say, we think this is the most viable site in our town, which is very restricted by the Cohen bill, and we're dealing with two state mandates. We're trying to honor the Cohen bill, and now we're forced to produce very high density housing, which is extremely expensive, far from affordable if you have to have a packaged sewage plan or whatever to make the numbers. I recommend considering that. As a totally separate comment or question, are we allowed to identify the district on, like in this case, this is mostly Chapter 61 land, so it's kind of pseudo-protected land, not fully or permanently, but currently protected, but could be developed. Can you identify land areas like DCR watershed land and say that's our district? It seems counter to the intent.
Your Board of Health chairman suggested that, putting the district on DCR land. But we can pitch that to the state, but I'll tell you what they're going to say. They're not going to allow it because that land is considered permanently protected, and to ever build on it, it would take an act of the state legislature.
Okay, understood, which is a 2/3 vote. And I expected that answer. I just wanted to confirm it because, in my opinion, in terms of access to an MBTA station, we should be looking at Worcester, the second largest city in New England, not poor old Leominster and Nashua Street, which is a just improved intersection on Route, is it 13? Yeah. And Nashua Street, it's much improved, but it's still very constrained if we have further growth. So I think we're making a mistake by not looking at, the functionality of our interstates and the potential that we might even have, maybe there's an on-ramp by this new development. Maybe there's not an off-ramp, a new off-ramp. There might just be an on-ramp, so we deal with the morning traffic where people tend to leave all at once. Those sorts of things, and the potential to grab other infrastructure funds in conjunction with the mandated development seems like a good opportunity if we stay close to highways, and as well as state routes.
All right, so we have a couple select board members here tonight. So you've given them your input in advance of the meeting on the 20th. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Steve?
Yes, sir.
I have been in politics for a while in town, and I do know that we approached the state about Washacum Village. Washacum Village is a dense packed area, and we felt that would add to our housing stock for low income. And so we did I'm trying to think of exactly who it was now, but it was Montechusett Planning Commission, I think, had a grant. And they get a grant for $1 million. The town gave them in-kind services to match that grant, and we went up there and put in some infrastructure. And therefore they got their septic system put in. The state was going to throw them off the land and make them tear down the housing. I think that if you haven't already done it, you should argue that point that Washacum Village should be brought back into the picture, and you should consider that as part of our overall housing stock that meets our low-income standard. That would be, I think, one area to go to. I like some of the other things that I've heard here, and I'll throw one further thing out. As an assessor in town, I know that 1/3 of this town is DCR land. It's either DCR, DOT, or Fish and Wildlife. 1/3. Another third is in chapter lands, as was just mentioned here a few minutes ago. It's 61, 61A, 61B. Those are protected lands to keep us, open space. It's really a good thing for us to have. And the other part is residential. So we don't have an awful lot of space to have residential, commercial, industrial. And I think in the past, we've had 2 zones. Dana Hill area, where you're talking about the commercial area right now, was performance zone. And in around Choxet, and that triangle, if you will, right in that area, which is kind of built up at this point. We've kept it separate from residential area, and that's been good. We've had light industry, not heavy industry, and one of the things that's brought that back into the town has been the light department. The light department has an extremely good and efficient unit. The light rates are low, very low, compared to Eversource, National Grid, so forth and so on. So we have a lot of things that attract people here, but we don't want heavy industry. And so I would say that that's just an overview of what we have. I'd go fight for the other things that we have over there, like Washington Village or any other place. Get the state to buy that if we can.
Thank you. One more.
What if any timeline exists for us to, if it's called compliance? Like, is there
They want us to comply by this town meeting.
They want. So I want to, like, what is the E?
December 31st, 2025. Okay, so we've got all of next calendar year.
I guess the follow-up to that is, as soon as, maybe I'm a little cynical, as soon as this gets written down and gets momentum, like, I'd just be concerned that we start here versus just throw this away and put all our effort into the 2 options of, let's look at what already exists on the Leominster line, and forgive me, I forgot what the other one is. I would hate to submit this and start getting feedback, and then this gets momentum, and developers come in, and so yada, yada, yada. So that'd be my feedback. Just
So I'm hearing 2 ideas for the select board. Either appeal the state's determination that we can't use the Northgate area, or work with Holden to challenge the validity of this law for towns that don't have the infrastructure. All right, one more.
What were the conditions that eliminated some of these other spots? What are the conditions that make them not applicable?
The properties that we've looked at so far along North Road, we're not going to put this on somebody's property who doesn't want it.
No, what about the existing ones? What about, like, Washington Village or Northgate really is the one. Why can't we make Northgate compliant to this, to their needs?
Because Northgate was approved by special permit and not by right. Yeah. All right, if you're through kicking the crap out of me on can you imagine the fun I'm going to have at town meeting trying to explain this to the 250 people?
You better put it online first.
Okay. Carl, can we go back a few slides? Let's go back. One more. Another one. Another one. Okay, here we are. All right. So another zoning amendment that the planning board wants to sponsor is revising our site plan provision in our zoning. Right now, in our zoning bylaw is a provision that says that the planning board handles site plans. And it also gives the planning board the authority to adopt site plan regulations. Now, the planning board has never adopted site plan regulations. Most towns that have it authorized in their zoning take that next step and put together site plan regulations. What you typically find in site plan regulations are, here's what you need to show on the plan, here's how the process works, here's the threshold for a traffic study, here's a threshold for an environmental study, and here are our design guidelines. Here's how we want you to build when you come to Sterling. Sterling doesn't have any of those regulations in place. So in terms of what a development ultimately looks like in town, in the past that's been at the whim of whoever's sitting on the planning board at any given time. That's not a good way to plan. It's been my experience that developers will build what you want if they know what you want. So that's why we're proposing to revise the site plan provision in our zoning to take out stuff that should be in the regulations and put them in a set of regulations that the planning board will adopt if this zoning amendment passes. Folks back there, can we? All right. So the planning board has been working with a consultant on a set of site plan regulations. We're just about done with them. They're going to be up online by the end of the month. So you'll be able to see how the provision in zoning dovetails with the new regulations. You understand that we don't have any design guidelines right now, and this would give us some. Questions?
It says large-scale development projects. Is that it only looking at large-scale development projects? Because what I'm thinking about is sometimes the surprise that some developers have when there is something called the Endangered Species Act that comes into play, and that can come into play on smaller scale developments as well.
These would be projects that the building commissioner says, you need to go to the planning board for site plan review. And then when they apply to us, these regulations would apply.
Right, but you're taking into account the MISA regulations.
There are thresholds that trigger an environmental
Right,
review
yeah.
and the MIPA process.
Right.
Yes.
Not MIPA.
What's that?
Endangered species, not MIPA, MISA.
MISA, sorry.
That's right.
Okay.
Is a large development just commercial, or is it also residential?
It's whatever the building commissioner says requires site plan review.
Okay. Of the available commercial land available, where is there?
Just about any new commercial project would require site plan review.
Okay, so they're all large.
The only commercial project that would not require site plan review is if they're putting a new use in an existing building. There's no outside changes to the building. All they're doing is switching out the sign. Brian.
Or Joe.
Sorry.
Where are you getting the ideas for this solution, the site plan regulations? Are you taking some pieces from other towns?
Yes,
where's that
we
process?
looked at about 15 other towns comparable in size. We've looked at all of their regulations and we picked and choose the ones that we thought were appropriate for Sterling. Okay, moving on. Next one. We're going to sponsor 2 zoning changes on behalf of the building department. We're adding new and revised definitions to the zoning bylaws definition section. There's a lot of things that we don't have defined that we ought to, and there's some current definitions that really should be elaborated on and explained in more clarity, so that's what we're doing there. Joe.
I talked to you about this before, and I just wanted to say out loud, we don't have any sections in this to talk about enforcement. Was that idea a good idea to try and think about that in this set?
It is. We've already got 9 zoning amendments that we're going to pummel town meeting with. We can't do everything at once.
but if you put out a rule and don't have any enforcement, there's a rule for it sometimes, you know?
There is an enforcement provision in our zoning. I cited it to you.
Okay, I thought that was a proposed one that you got from
No.
somewhere else. Okay.
No, I cited the exact provision in our zoning on enforcement. The next item on the building department's list is placing some limits on the use of accessory structures in residential districts. They're geared at making sure that people aren't storing heavy equipment for their businesses in their accessory buildings in residential neighborhoods, or using those accessory buildings for business purposes, unless they're deemed a home occupation. So just some clarity on that. Yes?
So I've heard you say multiple times, and I thought we figured this out earlier in the meeting, but you're still saying it, so I have to ask. You just mentioned you have 9 things to bring forward to town meeting. I was under the impression from the language that was put out to the town about this meeting was that you're taking feedback to figure out what things you are going to propose. So are you back to saying everything that's on here tonight, regardless of what we're saying? Is
no.
So you're...
We have 9 proposals that the planning board's going to figure out which ones they want to move forward.
Okay. So you just said a minute ago that you were bringing to town meeting, so I just want to figure out if...
Planning board's going to make that call at the December and January meetings as to which ones they want to move forward with. But we've got 9 ideas, and we don't want to overload town meeting with zoning. So.
Which is great. Thank you.
Next one. We covered this ad infinitum. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. This is the last one. Okay. So the town participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, and our flood areas were mapped on our flood rate insurance maps, and we're getting a new set of maps in December of this year. Your last set of flood rate insurance maps were prepared in 1982. So they're in need of update. And in order to use those new maps and maintain our participation in the federal flood insurance program, we've got to make some changes to our floodplain zoning in the zoning bylaw. Beefed up construction standards, elevation standards, but it's still the Conservation Commission that would be administering this bylaw. Questions?
I have a comment. 1984 or 1983, I know I fought the FEMA floodplain map because they wanted to charge me $88 a month for flood insurance, and that was more than my mortgage. And nobody else in the area had it, so I spent a lot of time, and I put together a good argument to be
So what you did was you petitioned for a map amendment.
I did, and I won. And so in any event, I didn't have to have them consider my particular area as a floodplain. And I think that
that's available as an option to any property owner in a floodplain.
Well, I would suggest that if you fall into one of these areas, and that's my point, then don't take it as gospel. If you think it's definitely something that hasn't flooded out in 200 years, fight it and see if they will change it. Now, I had a good enough argument, I guess, that they did change the maps, and so go do it if you can.
Next. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know why you said my house was being taken down.
Nobody said that. We're not taking down your house. No.
I hope not, because I have lived there for a long, long time.
I hope you continue to live there for a long, long time.
Thank you.
Yes. Other questions? Blessedly no. Folks, This is why we do this. This is why we bring our zoning amendments to you now, so that you know what we're proposing, you understand why we're proposing it. The planning board's going to take your feedback into account, and the feedback we receive from all the other boards, commissions, and committees. This is how we do zoning amendments properly. We don't just write them and show up at town meeting and pitch them. We have public forums on them. So the schedule moving forward. Planning board is going to spend their December and January meetings talking about these ideas and deciding which ones they want to move to town meeting. When we finalize our proposals, we're going to have 2 public forums right here in this building in February. One will be an evening meeting, and for those who can't make that evening meeting, we'll repeat the program on a Saturday morning. So you've got 2 options for showing up and hearing about the final proposals. Then the planning board will hold their required public hearing in March, and then it's off to town meeting in May.
And the ones you said, I'm sorry, January, February, just both in February? The public forums, those were both in February?
The public forums will be in February.
Okay, and at that time, there's no more, that's what you plan, not you personally, I'm sorry, like the planning board would plan to put out for town meeting? There's
We
no
are
more
bringing to
changes.
you our final proposals.
No more changes to be made at that?
No, again.
I'm asking, sorry, that was a question. That wasn't a statement, I apologize.
We're hoping that we can bring finalized proposals to you. And again, if we hear that ain't gonna fly, the planning board can decide at their March public hearing, which we're required to have, let's not move forward on this. It's no one wants it.
Thank you.
Okay? Thanks for playing, everyone. Appreciate it. If you want to read the exact language of the proposals, you can find them on the planning board website.